Are you planning to eat here? At these words, Ewan Granger merely nodded. His assistant, Elsie Meredith, seeing that her boss was still in a foul mood, didn't dare to say much more. It was 4 p.m., not quite the usual dinner time, so Ewan was the only customer in the restaurant. The owner, who had been looking down at his mobile, raised his head upon hearing their footsteps and asked with a smile, "What would you like to order?" It was a perfectly normal question, but to Elsie, it suddenly became very abnormal. She glanced at the restaurant owner, then turned to look at the young master beside her. Then, she swallowed hard. Ewan Granger also had a look of shock on his face, mixed with disbelief. Because the restaurant owner standing before them looked exactly like him, as if they were the same person. The restaurant owner opposite them, after a few seconds of eye contact, though also surprised, quickly regained his composure and asked again, "What would you two like to eat?" Elsie was secretly amazed, thinking to herself, the world is full of wonders. To think there's someone who looks exactly like the young master. Could this be the result of Mr. Granger's youthful indiscretions? "2 shepherd's pies, please," Ewan said, his eyes fixed intently on the owner who looked identical to him. The owner acknowledged the order and turned to the kitchen to prepare the food. Honestly, if it hadn't been broad daylight, Ewan would have thought he was seeing a ghost. His entire worldview had been shattered. To think that such an incredible thing could happen in this world. It wasn't until they had paid and left the restaurant that Ewan said to his assistant, "Find someone to investigate this." "What?" "All right." In the restaurant, Arthur Langley only raised his gaze after he felt the expensive car had driven far away. A very strong intuition told him that the well-mannered man, who looked like a young master from a wealthy family, was his twin brother, from whom he had been separated since childhood. Arthur had known about this since he was very young. He vaguely remembered his mother, on her deathbed in the hospital, holding his hand and saying with both shame and heartache, "Arthur, I'm sorry. If you had been adopted too back then, you probably wouldn't be living this kind of life now." Of course, Arthur didn't resent his mother, nor did he blame his stepfather. Although the family was poor, they had still managed to raise him with great effort. In a luxurious mansion. "What's wrong, son? You've been frowning ever since you came back from the company. Is it because of business issues? Alvin, don't just keep reading your newspaper. Did you scold our son at the company again?" Alvin Granger's mouth twitched at this. "I'm not that idle. Besides, didn't we already agree? Once Ewan completes his targets at the company, I'll support him in setting up his own business and provide the necessary startup capital in my name." Hearing this, Ewan's expression became even more depressed. He turned to his parents and asked, "Do we have any other children in our family?" "Ewan, I don't understand what you're saying." Phoebe Lambert also frowned, looking very confused. Ewan let out a deep sigh and then recounted what had happened that afternoon. His encounter with the restaurant owner who looked exactly like him. After he finished speaking, the large living room suddenly fell silent. Alvin Granger, seeing his wife's face slowly turn sad, knew she was thinking about that heartbreaking incident from long ago. After comforting his wife, he turned to look very seriously at his son, Ewan. "Did you reconnect with him? So my guess was right? He really is my brother? Why did you abandon him?" Although he had anticipated it, getting confirmation from his parents still shocked him. "Ewan! How dare you speak to your elders like that? Besides, it's not at all what you think. Sit down, and I'll explain everything to you slowly." Back then, when Phoebe had just become pregnant, Alvin accompanied his wife to the hospital for their monthly routine checkup. On their way back, they were involved in a car accident. The reason they survived was that Ewan's biological father saved them, but sadly, he passed away due to severe injuries. At that time, Phoebe also miscarried due to the shock and lost the ability to conceive again. Afterwards, to repay the life-saving kindness of Ewan's biological father, they decided to adopt the orphan. However, they never expected that Ewan's mother would give birth to twins and only agreed to let them adopt one child. "I'm sorry. After all these years, we're only telling you the truth today. If it wasn't for your birth mother's insistence, we would never have let you brothers be separated for so many years." After hearing all this, Ewan's reaction was surprisingly calm. He just said, "Oh. By the way, which one of us is the older brother?" Ewan, Mabel's back from abroad. Have you seen her yet? You two have always fancied each other, haven't you? You should get engaged soon. We are all waiting for grandchildren. Ewan jolted awake from his dream, gasping for air. The mere thought of that domineering, crazy woman who had tormented him countless times in his childhood becoming his girlfriend made Ewan shudder involuntarily. Suddenly, a flash of inspiration struck Ewan's mind. He instantly recalled the person he had seen earlier that day who looked exactly like him. That person was his own brother. If he could ask him for a favor, to impersonate him, it shouldn't be a problem, right? The next morning, Arthur had just opened the doors to his restaurant when he saw a luxury car park in a spot not far from his establishment. What's this? Though we've been separated since childhood, aren't you going to call me brother? I assume you already know, don't you? Ewan asked, taking the initiative as they sat across from each other in the restaurant. I do, Arthur nodded. Mother told me you were adopted when you were little. Your adoptive parents' surname should be Granger, right? If that's correct, then you are indeed my long-lost elder brother. Though somewhat surprised by Arthur's calm demeanor, Ewan pressed on. How is she? Is she well? Mother passed away 7 years ago. Arthur's face showed a hint of bitterness. Ewan, upon hearing the news of his birth mother's death, felt no ripple in his heart. He had been separated from his birth mother since he was little. In his mind, he only had one mother, Phoebe Lambert. The others were not. You're doing all right now, aren't you? He asked awkwardly, noticing the oil stains on his brother's clothes. Yes, I'm fine. Are you living alone now? Yes, I have a sister, but she's my stepfather's daughter. She lives with her birth mother. Oh, I see. Ewan was pondering how to broach the subject of his plan. After all, even though they were brothers, they had been separated for so many years that they were almost like strangers. However, the thought of getting married at such a young age, and to a woman he deeply disliked, made Ewan feel like his world was about to end. After organizing his thoughts, he explained his plan to his brother in detail. Silence. The small restaurant was very quiet. Did I hear you correctly? You want me to take your place and impersonate you at your company? Keep your voice down. Ewan, seeing his brother's strong reaction, cautiously looked around. Realizing no one had come in, he breathed a sigh of relief. Then he began his performance of self-pity. Arthur, you have no idea how busy and exhausted I am. Every day when I open my eyes and get to the office, there are mountains of documents and files that need reviewing and approving. Most importantly, I have to entertain clients with drinks and meals every day, often until very late. Just the other day, my gastritis flared up again, and I had to get IV drips at the hospital for several days. It won't be for too long, just 2 months. Besides, we're brothers. Blood is thicker than water. There's no one in this world closer than you and me. If you don't help your brother, next time it won't be just a simple hospital visit for 4 drips. As he finished speaking, Ewan's eyes were slightly red, his face pale, and his entire demeanor appeared very weak, clearly worn out from long-term high-intensity work. Arthur was also considering what his elder brother had said. After a long deliberation, he hesitantly asked, Ewan, as you can see, I'm just a small restaurant owner. I don't know anything about the documents and files you mentioned. What if I mess things up for you? Hearing that he hadn't outright refused, Ewan knew there was hope for his plan. His face showed a range of emotions, almost on the verge of tears as he said, Arthur, you wouldn't want your elder brother to be in and out of the hospital for checkups at such a young age, would you? As for your concerns, they're not an issue at all. Remember the girl who came here to eat shepherd's pie with me yesterday? Her name is Elsie Meredith, she's my assistant. She'll help you handle everything. You just need to pretend to be me, go to work every day, that's all. But even so, how can I deceive your parents? I don't think I have any chance of pulling that off. Arthur shook his head, still worried. You don't need to worry about that at all. You don't think I still live with my parents, do you? I only visit them occasionally. Most of the time, I live in my own villa. Ewan smiled, thinking his brother had already agreed. He's so easy to fool, he thought. Don't worry, little brother. If my parents call, you can just use work as an excuse and decline. It's only for 2 months anyway. But I feel it's not right to deceive them like this. Come on, brother, we're family. Are you really going to be so heartless and refuse to help your big brother? Ewan's plea made Arthur blush with guilt. He remembered that even on her deathbed, their mother had kept calling for both of them, showing how important the two brothers were to her. Ewan, let's go see Mother. See Mother? Yes, let's light some incense for her. So, you're willing to help me? Elsie Meredith, the assistant, couldn't help but think that Arthur Langley, the impersonator of her boss Ewan Granger's brother, had a remarkably composed personality. Through their interactions over the past few days, she even had the illusion that the man before her was the real boss. In the evening, Arthur had just finished dinner with a client, accompanied by Elsie. She went to get the car, while he waited here. Not far away, a woman of undeniable presence and noble bearing approached. Even Arthur himself couldn't help but steal a glance and inwardly gasp in awe. Putting aside her exquisite beauty and curvaceous figure, her height alone was enough to make most men feel inadequate. Her stature was truly extraordinary. Arthur estimated she must be at least 5 feet 11 inches. With long, burgundy hair, a svelte figure, and graceful posture, she exuded the mature sophistication of a powerful businesswoman through her delicate features. Her slightly curled burgundy locks cascaded down, conveniently concealing her fair neck and collarbone. She wore a dark red blazer over her upper body. Below her short skirt was a pair of long legs that no man could resist admiring, complemented by alluring black stockings, a truly lethal combination of allure. Though Arthur couldn't help being drawn to her aura, he knew it was extremely impolite to keep staring at a woman. So he deliberately averted his gaze and walked past her, intending to take a few steps forward to wait for his brother's assistant, Elsie. Mabel Latham's bright eyes, hidden behind large sunglasses, narrowed in displeasure as she turned her head to call out to Arthur. Ewan Granger. After 2 years, you're pretending not to know me? Hearing this, Arthur halted his forward motion and turned back to look at her with some surprise. Seeing Arthur's smile, Mabel removed her sunglasses with her slender hand and asked hesitantly, "Do you really not recognize me? You weren't even going to say hello as we passed by. So, do you actually oppose this marriage too?" What? Arthur was visibly startled. What did she mean? What marriage? His brother hadn't mentioned anything about this. How's that? The ink's not even dry, and you're already playing dumb? Seeing his attitude, Mabel immediately felt a surge of inexplicable anger. Excuse me, you are still pretending. Even now, he's still keeping up the act. Mabel took a deep breath, trying her best to control her temper in public, and said through gritted teeth, "Although it was arranged by our parents, it still requires our consent in the end. What's with your attitude now? Are you feeling guilty because, as the rumors say, you have too many girlfriends to remember me? Or are you trying to humiliate me in this way?" Arthur was now quite certain that this stunningly beautiful woman with a noble air must have an extraordinary relationship with his brother, possibly even that of boyfriend and girlfriend. Realizing this, he immediately became anxious. His brother really should have told him such important information. How was he supposed to smooth things over now? Just as Arthur was fretting like an ant on a hot pan, Elsie came out from the car park. Seeing the scene before her, her face changed dramatically. She immediately rushed over, then gave Mabel a quick smile before whispering rapidly in Arthur's ear. "This is your brother's friend, sort of a childhood sweetheart. She's been studying abroad for the past 2 years and just got back. To be precise, she's about to become your brother's fiancée." What on earth? Childhood sweetheart? Soon-to-be fiancé? He asked nervously, "What should I do now? Have I blown my cover? I don't know what you've said to her, but this woman is difficult to deal with. Get rid of her quickly, and try to avoid interacting with her in the future." Elsie hadn't expected that taking the fake boss out for dinner with a client would lead to an encounter with this woman. It truly embodied the old saying that man proposes, but God disposes. "Oh, it's you. I've been so busy lately, I didn't realize at first. We haven't seen each other for so long, and I had a bit too much to drink earlier. So I didn't recognize you right away. Sorry about that. As he finished speaking, he scratched his head somewhat embarrassed, his face wearing a completely foolish expression. Mabel's delicate hand clenched into a fist, really wanting to give this man a piece of her mind. Just because they hadn't seen each other for 2 years, he completely forgot her? Is that how it is? She laughed angrily. Yes, Mr. Granger is a busy man. How could he remember old acquaintances? But to forget even your soon-to-be fiancé, it seems Mr. Granger is truly one of a kind. Even though Arthur was honest and simple, he could still hear the dissatisfaction and sarcasm in his brother's soon-to-be fiancé's voice. He stood there dumbfounded, not knowing what to do. Seeing him break out in a sweat, his face flushed red and at a loss for words after just a few sentences from her, Mabel suddenly felt a twinge of guilt. Remembering that their relationship had been arranged by their parents, she felt a sense of helplessness wash over her. She stepped forward and linked her slender arm through Arthur's. Come on, accompany me inside for dinner. No. I can't. Arthur panicked, his body jerking as he quickly pulled his arm out of her grasp. He waved his hands repeatedly, saying, No, I just ate, I'm very full. You go ahead, we'll do it together next time, yes, next time. Mabel frowned slightly, crossing her arms. The corners of her red lips curled into an intentional smile, staring at Arthur until his face turned red, unable to meet her gaze. Had the man before her changed so much in 2 years? Not only was he stuttering and slow to react, but his shy demeanor and inability to meet her eyes completely overturned the image of Ewan Granger she had in her mind. Could the rumors be false? Was he not actually a playboy? Mabel looked Arthur up and down for a good while before speaking again. Even if we're not boyfriend and girlfriend, our families are old friends. Is it really so unpleasant for you to have dinner with me? No. I'm not, I didn't. Arthur knew the situation was getting worse. He might have inadvertently upset his future sister-in-law. And if it affected his brother's marriage, he would feel guilty for the rest of his life. Elsie had originally wanted the fake boss to quickly send Mabel away and think of other ways to deal with the situation later. But she never expected that the fake boss in front of her would be rendered speechless and at a loss by just a few words from Mabel. She knew that if this continued, they might really be exposed, so she spoke up directly. I'm very sorry, Miss Latham, but our boss has another extremely important meeting. He will contact you as soon as possible later. Excuse us, Miss Latham. Elsie gave a slight bow, then shot Arthur a meaningful look. The two of them hurriedly got into the car and left without hesitation. Mabel's furrowed brow suddenly relaxed, and the corners of her mouth slowly curved into a smile. She had a big question in her mind. Why did so many friends say that Ewan Granger was no good? That he was a womanizer, a scoundrel, a playboy? But the Ewan she met today gave her a completely different impression from what others had described. How should she put it? It was as if the man before her wasn't Ewan at all, but someone else, someone who looked exactly like Ewan. Thinking of this, Mabel shook her head in denial. She must be overthinking it. After all, they hadn't seen each other for over 2 years. Perhaps he really had changed? She'd have to observe him carefully next time they met before making a decision. Ring, ring, ring. The phone rang. Though Arthur hesitated for a moment, he still picked up. Open the door, I'm right outside. A woman's voice came through, sounding quite familiar. Looking at the now disconnected call, Arthur got up to open the door out of politeness. The person at the door was indeed someone familiar, whom he had just met yesterday. It was Mabel Latham. Today she was wearing a tank top and a tight skirt. Her long legs wrapped in black stockings looked both alluring and heart-stirring. A waft of perfume invaded Arthur's senses as she entered, leaving him momentarily stunned. Mabel walked in confidently, flashing an intoxicating smile. Well? You should know who I am today, right? At least your assistant must have told you privately what I'm called. And all about our complicated relationship, isn't that so? So, aren't you going to offer your almost fiancé a glass of water? Arthur was flustered, especially upon hearing the words almost fiancé. His face turned red as he hurriedly invited Mabel to sit down before fetching a glass of water. I explained yesterday, it was just because I'd had too much to drink that I didn't recognize you right away. Of course I know who you are now, you're Mabel Latham. A faint smile played on Mabel's delicate features as she stared directly at Arthur. His shy demeanor, blushing at the mere sight of her, was completely different from Ewan Granger, that suave charmer who had been arrogant and glib since childhood. She took a small sip of the water Arthur had brought, then said casually, "Let's go. Take me out for a meal." "I can't." "No. I don't mean it like that," Arthur stammered, his eyes darting about nervously as he waved his hands in explanation. "I just meant it's not quite mealtime yet." "Oh." Mabel set down her glass and leaned in closer, her curvaceous figure advancing as she fixed her large boots mascaraed eyes on his. Her enticing scent wafted over him. "We're childhood friends, and I've just returned from studying abroad. Is it really so difficult for you to take me out for a meal?" Arthur suddenly had the urge to call Elsie and ask her to join them. He truly didn't know how to handle Mabel on his own. Seeing him hemming and hawing without saying anything, Mabel asked irritably, "What's wrong? Is having a meal with me really so troublesome for you? Or do you have another important meeting? Are you really that busy? Or perhaps you have a bunch of little girlfriends waiting for you?" No, it's really not like that," Arthur protested. "I just thought, maybe we should invite Elsie Meredith to join us." Your female assistant? Why bring her along? We're just going for a meal, not discussing business. Tell me, are you planning to use your assistant as cover so you can slip away again?" Mabel gritted her teeth, her gaze as sharp as an icy blade. "It seems you're not even going to bother with pretenses, and are just laying all your cards on the table?" Honestly, in Arthur's 20-some years of life, apart from his stepfather's daughter, his nominal sister, no other woman had ever been this close and intimate with him. Moreover, the subtle fragrance emanating from her was constantly stimulating his brain. With such an elegant, beautiful woman with a stunning figure standing before him, pouting coquettishly, Arthur was on the verge of losing his composure and bolting. It was truly too much for him. All right. Let's go eat then." He was truly frightened now, thinking only of quickly finishing the meal with her and seeing her off. Mabel's sulky expression broke into a smile. She stared at Arthur a moment longer until he could no longer meet her gaze and his expression grew flustered. Only then did she give a little nod. In an upscale restaurant. As soon as Arthur sat down, he couldn't help but surreptitiously admire the luxurious interior. For a regular bloke like him, in his 20-some years of life, he'd never had the chance to set foot in a place like this, nor could he have afforded it. When the waiter came over to ask what they would like to order, Arthur found himself at a loss once again. Mabel didn't let him flounder, and directly ordered 2 steaks. "Eat up." "Why are you staring at the steak like that?" Arthur scratched his head sheepishly, then asked cautiously, "Did you just say these 2 steaks cost £4,000 in total?" "Yes." "What about it?" Mabel was quite puzzled. She kept wondering if the man across from her would actually eat it. Because the real Ewan absolutely did not like beef or lamb. "What kind of steak is this?" "It's practically more expensive than gold. Kobe beef steak, one of the best steaks in the world." Watching Arthur's incredulous expression as he kept drawing sharp breaths, Mabel was now quite certain that the man before her was not her childhood friend, but someone who looked identical to Ewan. If he actually ate the beef, it would be 100% confirmed that it wasn't him, and there would be no need for further testing. Hurry up and eat, or else this £2,000 per serving Kobe beef steak will go to waste. Mabel deliberately emphasized the £2,000 to provoke the naive man before her. Sure enough, upon hearing the price, Arthur immediately nodded repeatedly, then directly speared the entire steak with his fork. If the man before her was Ewan Granger, she'd eat her hat. After dinner, the waiter brought coffee. Mabel noticed Arthur's strange expression and couldn't help but ask curiously, "What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell?" "No. I just think it's a bit wasteful to spend thousands of pounds on a meal when you could actually get full for just £20. £20? Mabel looked surprised. "Do you mean £20 for both of us?" "Huh?" Arthur suddenly realized he was supposed to be playing the role of his brother Ewan. He quickly tried to explain, No, you misunderstood. I meant that 20 pounds could buy 2 pies or a full English breakfast, for example. Mabel made a small sound of acknowledgement and didn't press him further. She was now very curious about who this man in front of her really was. Mabel was helping her mother Ethel prepare vegetables in the kitchen, chatting and laughing together. As they talked, the conversation suddenly turned to Ewan. "Mabel, you've been back for a while now. How are things going with Ewan? Even though you haven't seen each other for 2 years, you've known each other since childhood. Our families are old friends. If you think it's a good match, your father and I, along with Mr. and Mrs. Granger, are ready to set a date for the wedding. It's still early days, let's see how it goes." Mabel suddenly thought of that awkward, goofy-looking man. Who was he really? Why did he look exactly like Ewan Granger? All right then. Whatever happens, Mom will respect your decision. It's just that at my age, I keep thinking how nice it would be to have a grandchild. Ethel said with a smile, her words tinged with longing. However, in the years you've been away, Ewan's reputation has, well, it's not been the best. He seems to have become a bit of a ladies' man, perhaps because you weren't around to keep him in check. As a mother, Ethel was naturally concerned for her daughter. I suppose it's just him playing the field, missing you perhaps. Is that so? Maybe. Mabel had heard countless stories about Ewan's escapades from her friends. And she wasn't particularly interested anymore. She knew what he was like, always so arrogant since they were children. However, the man pretending to be Ewan had piqued her curiosity greatly. Seeing her daughter's nonchalant attitude, Ethel wondered if she should tell her about something she'd learned a few days ago. "Mom, what's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? If you have something to say, just say it." Mabel could tell her mother seemed to have something on her mind, apparently related to Ewan Granger. "Well, I only found out recently myself. I hope you won't be too shocked." I'm listening. The thing is, Ewan isn't Phoebe and Alvin's biological son. Not their biological son? Mabel was slightly surprised, but then just made a small sound of acknowledgement, clearly not finding it a big deal. Even if he wasn't their biological son, Phoebe and Alvin had always treated Ewan very well. Seeing her daughter's calm reaction, Ethel continued. "I heard from Phoebe the other day that Ewan actually has a brother, a twin who looks exactly like him." "A brother? Identical?" Mabel exclaimed, feeling as if a bolt of lightning had struck her. She quickly asked her mother, "What's his name? Is there any way to tell them apart?" "I've forgotten his name, but Phoebe said they once went to see the boy with Ewan. Apparently, he has a small red birthmark on his left ear, which might be the only way to distinguish between them." Honestly, Phoebe said she was stunned when she saw the boy. She couldn't tell which one was the older brother and which was the younger until she noticed that birthmark. "Are you saying Ewan has already met his brother?" Seeing her mother nod, Mabel could no longer concentrate on her mother's chatter. That man, the one impersonating Ewan Granger, who looked exactly like him, was actually his twin brother. Ding dong! Ding dong! Arthur heard someone repeatedly ringing the doorbell and curiously went to open it. "Darling, why haven't you been coming to see me lately? You naughty boy! You've stolen my heart and won't give it back." As soon as he opened the door, a woman with heavy makeup and revealing clothes threw herself into his arms, startling the unprepared Arthur. Just as he was about to push the woman in his arms away, she wrapped her arms around his neck, half closing her eyes and puckering her bright red lips as she leaned in. Arthur, like a startled rabbit, pushed the beautiful woman away with lightning speed, causing her to stumble backwards. He then turned and slammed the door shut without hesitation. His heart was pounding uncontrollably, and his nerves seemed a bit frayed. He could hear the woman's crying and lamenting from outside the door. Over the past few days, he had encountered countless women like this. These women were all his brother's girlfriends. He couldn't do anything about it, but as Elsie had suggested, if he just closed the door and ignored them, eventually they would stop bothering him. Arthur had followed this advice, and it was indeed effective. The woman outside cried and pleaded for over an hour. But seeing that her lover inside seemed determined not to open the door, she had no choice but to leave dejectedly. However, she passed Mabel on her way out, thinking to herself, "Another one coming to get her heart broken." Mabel kept watching until the woman's figure disappeared from sight before turning to the door. The doorbell rang again, and Arthur inside could no longer control himself. He angrily opened the door and started to berate, "Have you no shame? I'm not your darling." Then, his voice grew quieter and quieter until he fell silent completely. Because he saw that it was Mabel at the door. She was looking at him with an amused smile. Mabel crossed her arms over her chest, deciding to tease him a bit. She said playfully, My, a few days apart and Mr. Granger's temper has grown. Even scolding your own fiancé-to-be. If we actually get married, I fear domestic violence won't be far behind. No, that's not. I don't know, I wasn't swearing at you just now, I was talking to someone else. Mabel rolled her eyes at Arthur, then walked confidently into the living room. Arthur felt anxious inside. Why had she come again? But he could only close the door and silently wonder how to deal with Mabel. However, from the moment she entered, Mabel had been staring intently at him. Until Arthur's face turned red with embarrassment and he couldn't meet her gaze. Just as I thought. This guy is definitely an imposter. He really does have a red birthmark on his left ear. So he's Ewan's younger brother. Isn't he a bit too cute and shy? He got so embarrassed just from me staring at him for a few seconds. Why are you just standing there? Sit down and let's chat. But Arthur just mumbled "oh" and sat down on the sofa several feet away from her. However, Mabel already knew his identity, so she teased him on purpose, slowly moving her body closer to him. You know. You're acting very strange today. Before, when we chatted, you would always carry me in your arms like a princess, saying I could never escape your embrace that way. Arthur was at a loss for words when he suddenly heard this, and started coughing repeatedly. See, carry her like a princess? He was completely stunned. The beautiful woman in front of him was his sister-in-law. Although the two families weren't officially engaged yet, from a certain perspective. If he dared to do that, it would be immoral and cross ethical boundaries. Have you gone daft? Hurry up! Mabel held out her arms, making a hug me gesture. This startled Arthur so much he didn't know what to do. He instinctively jumped up from the sofa and backed far away. Mabel's beautiful eyes curved into crescents as she giggled nonstop. What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? No. The sofa was just a bit uncomfortable. I'm fine standing, really. Arthur waved his hands explaining as Mabel winked at him. Mabel rolled her eyes at him again, but then noticed a flash of black in the crack of the sofa cushions. Curious, she reached over and pulled it out. When she unfolded it, she saw it was a black lacy women's thong. Her face instantly flushed red. In her anger, she threw it at Arthur. Is this what you do at home? Huh? I didn't. After opening the small women's underwear, Arthur's face also turned bright red with embarrassment. He didn't know what to do. Although Mabel was furious, she thought this might be something Ewan had carelessly stuffed in the sofa. Crack during an intimate moment with some woman. Thinking about what must have happened on that sofa made her angry and disgusted. She stood up abruptly and scolded Arthur. Throw it away immediately. Quickly! Arthur felt very guilty. He mumbled "oh" and went straight to the bedroom, intending to quickly put away his brother's item. He'd have to be more careful in the future, since there was still over a month until the agreed date with his brother. Unexpectedly, Mabel followed right behind him. The moment he opened the wardrobe, they both cried out in shock. Their faces burning red with embarrassment at what was inside. The wardrobe was full of women's lingerie, various sexy stockings, as well as some adult toys, and even a large doll. Seeing Mabel's face turn red, looking like she might explode at any moment. Arthur was at a loss for words, not knowing how to explain. Throw what's in your hand in there. And don't ever open this wardrobe again. Faced with Mabel's red-faced, loud scolding, Arthur didn't dare argue. Mabel felt like she was about to burst with anger. This Ewan Granger really was a scumbag. To think he had so many women's intimate items at home. It seems the stories her friends told about his womanizing ways weren't unfounded after all. I'm hungry. Let's go out to eat. Mabel closed the bedroom door and made up an excuse, planning to ask Arthur out. Huh? Do you want to go for steak again? What? Don't you want to go eat with me? No, no, no. It's not that, I just think the food there is really expensive. Mabel casually strolled into the kitchen and saw quite a few ingredients. She realized he had probably been planning to cook at home before she arrived unexpectedly. Were you going to cook for yourself? Could I maybe cook for you this time? Sure. Arthur agreed without thinking much. He was a cook after all, even if he only knew how to make some simple home-style dishes. It should be fine to serve her, right? Then I want fish and chips, and meatballs and gravy. Mabel listed some of her favorite foods as she opened the fridge and took out a bottle of soda. Arthur, who had been about to start preparing vegetables, paused in his movements. He smiled and nodded, saying all right. Mabel leaned against the kitchen doorway, sipping her soda while closely observing Arthur. She watched as he skillfully sliced the fish and shaped the meatballs, looking very practiced. Her heart leapt with joy. The real Ewan probably couldn't even boil instant noodles. He had been weighted on hand and foot since childhood. When did he learn to make fish and chips? To be honest, Mabel didn't know how she felt right now, but she was certainly very curious about Arthur. I can't finish this. Can you drink the rest for me? Arthur, who was about to start cooking, hesitated when he heard this. But under her direct gaze, he obediently accepted the half-empty bottle of soda. What's wrong? Do you find me disgusting? No, no. It's not that. I'm just not used to drinking cold carbonated drinks before meals. A hint of a deep, meaningful smile appeared in Mabel's eyes again. She decided not to push Arthur further and said never mind then, taking back the half-empty soda bottle from him. This was a reliable man, even in the face of her repeated tests. The food was ready quickly. For a chef who had run a small restaurant for years, this was a very simple task. Wow. Your cooking is delicious. This is the best fish and chips I've ever had. Do you cook often? After tasting the food, Mabel couldn't help but repeatedly praise Arthur's culinary skills. Although a bit exaggerated, the flavors really were quite good. I remember you didn't know how to cook at all before. I can't believe you've become so skilled after not seeing you for 2 years. You didn't secretly train as a chef for 2 years, did you? Yes, mainly I often watched cooking videos in my spare time, then tried making things myself a few times. Gradually I learned. Arthur felt that if this continued, his impersonation of his brother would eventually be exposed. I see. Then can I come find you every day from now on? You can cook delicious food for me. Arthur sighed internally, but nodded and said all right. Mabel thought the man before her was just too adorable. She couldn't help wanting to claim him as her own. Darling, why don't we get engaged? What? Hearing this, Arthur nearly choked on a mouthful of rice, staring blankly at the woman in front of him. Mabel saw that Arthur was startled by her, which only made her like this man even more. Though he looked exactly like Ewan, their personalities couldn't be more different. One was honest and often shy, while the other was a playboy who changed girlfriends daily. That's right. Once we're engaged and you become my fiancé, we can live together, can't we? Mabel cooed. What? Live together? Arthur was shocked by Mabel's words and stood up abruptly. He wanted to flee the house immediately. This woman was too much for him to handle. However, Mabel frowned slightly, pouting her red lips in disappointment at his reaction. Don't you like me anymore? You used to always talk about having lots of children with me. Now you've suddenly changed your mind. I think you just don't love me anymore. Lots of children? Yes. You love football so much, you said you wanted me to give you a whole football team. But it seems you've changed your mind. Everything you said before was just lies. No, I didn't lie to you, Arthur stammered, panicking when he saw Mabel was truly upset. Really? Oh, of course. Seeing Arthur so flustered, like a frightened little rabbit, Mabel could barely contain her laughter. Well, having children takes time. Why don't we start tonight, darling? She purred seductively. Her voice was so coy and alluring that even Mabel herself felt a shiver run through her body. She never imagined she'd act this way, especially in front of a strange man. Arthur's whole body trembled violently at her words. His mind went blank and he instinctively shook his head in refusal. No. Absolutely not. Why not? You weren't like this before. Mabel pressed, pretending to be upset. It's just not possible. Arthur didn't know how to respond anymore. He averted his eyes, trying his best not to be affected by the soft, jade-like body in his arms. I'm not feeling well. I need to use the loo. Sorry. Without looking at Mabel's expression, he gently pushed her away and rushed to the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind him. In the living room, Mabel covered her mouth to stifle her giggles. Her curvaceous figure shook with laughter. Then she rested her cheek on her hand, lost in thought as she stared at the bathroom door. Oh, Mabel, you're in trouble. You've fallen in love. Could it be true? Had she really fallen for him? About 15 minutes later, Arthur emerged from the bathroom. He had washed his face with cold water several times, but it was still flushed red. He avoided looking at Mabel as he walked out. Especially that evasive gaze, Mabel was now certain. This man before her was truly upright and honest. Perhaps her teasing had gone too far earlier? The next day, Arthur had just finished work when he saw Mabel standing stylishly outside his office, wearing sunglasses and waving at him. To be honest, he wasn't sure if he should approach her. I've already bought the groceries. Shall we head home? She asked cheerfully. All right, he agreed reluctantly. Mabel watched Arthur, noting his pitiful expression and how he seemed to fear her. She couldn't help but think to herself that it was as if she was some kind of monster who had frightened him. She was quite pretty, after all. Back at home, Arthur took off his coat, washed his hands, and obediently went to the kitchen to start cooking dinner. As he was chopping vegetables, his mind wandered to how he should deal with Mabel. In that moment of distraction, Mabel suddenly appeared behind him. Darling, shall we have some beer with dinner? What? Arthur turned his head in surprise, accidentally nicking his finger with the knife. Blood immediately began to flow. Mabel let out a cry of alarm and quickly grabbed his hand in concern. How could you be so careless? It must hurt. Do you have any antiseptic and plasters in the house? Yes, in the drawer in the spare bedroom. Wait here, I'll go get them. Mabel rushed to fetch the antiseptic and plasters. When she returned to the kitchen, she saw Arthur rinsing the cut under the tap. Oh no, what are you doing? Don't you know that could cause an infection? It's fine. When I was training as a chef, I used to cut myself all the time. I just wasn't paying attention today. Don't worry, it's just a small cut. It'll heal in a few days. Mabel frowned, pouting as she scolded him while carefully applying medicine and bandaging his finger. But there could be bacteria or rust on the knife. What if it gets infected? You don't take care of yourself at all. You're making me worry too. Arthur blushed at her words, unable to meet her gaze as he looked away. Once the bandaging was done, Arthur quickly pulled his hand away and turned to continue chopping vegetables. What are you doing? Mabel asked. Chopping vegetables, he replied, unsure. You're injured. How can you keep chopping? Let's order takeaway instead. Mabel didn't give Arthur a chance to refuse. She clung tightly to his arm as they went to the living room together. The takeaway arrived quickly. Perhaps because Mabel had spent quite a bit of money and was a valued customer. The delivery was very prompt and the service excellent. It must have been expensive, Arthur commented softly, looking at the feast laid out before them. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Just think of it as your future wife treating her husband to a nice meal. Is that not allowed? Mabel replied. Arthur didn't dare respond. He just lowered his head and slowly ate his food. What's wrong? Are you upset? Mabel asked worriedly when Arthur remained silent. No, he shook his head. I was just thinking I should take Thea out for a meal like this sometime. It really is much better than my cooking. Mabel was very perceptive. She immediately latched onto the name Thea that Arthur had unconsciously mentioned and asked jealously. Who's Thea? Arthur cursed inwardly. How could he have let that slip? He really had no filter, just blurting out whatever came to mind. What a fool he was bound to give himself away sooner or later. Oh, she's my sister. Yes, that's right, my sister, he stammered. Sister? Mabel wasn't about to let him off the hook. She frowned slightly, determined to get to the bottom of this. We grew up together. How come I've never heard about you having a sister? Hearing this, Arthur was once again at a loss for words. This situation was clearly going from bad to worse. Thea was indeed his sister, his stepfather's biological daughter. But she had no relation to his older brother Ewan. Well, she's the child of one of my mother's friends. She just turned 18 and started university. Mabel let out a long "oh," though it wasn't clear if she was overthinking things. She simply nodded, seemingly deciding not to press him further on the matter. Shall we go for a walk? Mabel suggested. Arthur couldn't refuse, so he nodded passively. The summer sun set late in the evening. The western sky was painted a fiery red. The surrounding paths were filled with people taking after-dinner strolls. There were even many elderly folks doing Morris dancing, and children playing and frolicking about. Mabel was dressed stylishly, wearing sunglasses, her long legs encased in black stockings. And her shapely figure turned heads wherever she went. Do you feel pressured walking with me? She asked, her eyes curved into crescents as she looked at Arthur with an enchanting smile. Yes, you're so beautiful and tall. It does make me feel a bit nervous, Arthur admitted. Oh, really? So is there more pressure or more delight? That's different. How is it different? Arthur was at a loss for words, unsure how to respond. Should he say there was more delight? That certainly wouldn't do. But if he said there was more pressure, wouldn't that be making trouble for no reason? Silence. Arthur fell silent yet again. He couldn't remember how many times he'd been rendered speechless by this woman in the past month. He'd lost count. Mabel had grown accustomed to the silence of the man before her, because she knew him. Looking towards the setting sun on the distant horizon, she couldn't help but feel sentimental. They say the sunset is beautiful, but it's nearing dusk. Something so lovely will eventually sink behind the western hills. She was lamenting the brevity of their time together, fearing that one day this man before her would disappear. And she'd be left with Ewan again. But Arthur didn't seem to understand her meaning and responded casually. I suppose only those who don't lack any material comforts, who have money and time, would wax poetic about the beauty of a sunset. For those of us living at the bottom of society, the setting sun is just an ordinary occurrence. It means today's work is done, time to rest well for the night, and tomorrow we'll carry on. Mabel's eyes, hidden behind her sunglasses, seemed to sparkle. She stared intently at the not-so-tall man beside her. Suddenly, Mabel smiled. She felt as if she'd discovered a treasure, and she was grateful to Ewan. You're right. Only those of us who don't lack money and have leisure time would contemplate the scenery and feel that life is peaceful and beautiful. If I were a struggling worker at the bottom of society right now, I wouldn't have time to think about these things. My mind would be full of mortgage payments, car loans, and money for the baby's formula. This time, it was Arthur's turn to be stunned. He really hadn't expected Mabel to be like this. In his impression, most wealthy heirs, especially Chelsea girls like Mabel, were spoiled and didn't know the hardships of life. They spent their days beautifying themselves, shopping at malls, having afternoon tea, or traveling the world with their girlfriends. But the Mabel before him actually agreed with his point of view, which surprised and puzzled Arthur. What's wrong, darling? Did I say something incorrect? Mabel asked, moving closer as she handed her handbag to Arthur. No, what you said was quite good. Arthur hesitated but still took the bag she offered. Then, to his astonishment, he felt a pair of delicate arms wrap around his own. In an instant, Arthur's heart began to race, his body tensed, and his mind nearly stopped working. Mabel watched as the man beside her turned bright red in a matter of seconds, his gaze darting about, unable to meet her eyes. She found it truly amusing. He had just been lecturing her, and now he was so timid. Her own heart was racing too, a strange flutter growing in her chest. This man always seemed to unknowingly stir her desire to possess him. Darling, let's get engaged. You and me get engaged. What? Arthur was startled. Had he said something wrong? Oh no, he might have gotten his brother into trouble. Forget it. Let's just get married. Huh? Arthur was shocked again, suddenly standing up from the park bench. His mind going blank and his speech becoming clumsy. Why? No reason don't you like me? Mabel leaned in close, her breath like orchids. And no, that's not it. Well then, I like you too, so let's get married, okay? Or do you want me to propose to you? I'm the girl here, you know. No. It's just not possible right now. Arthur refused, somewhat helplessly and nervously, as he saw Mabel wrap her arms around his. Why not now? It was summer, and they were wearing light clothes. Arthur suddenly felt the softness from Mabel's chest against his arm. And his face immediately turned red with embarrassment. 20 days. Give me 20 days, and I'll give you an answer then. Hearing this, Mabel understood completely. In 20 days, the man before her would likely leave her, and then he would truly become Ewan Granger. Realizing this, she suddenly felt scared and afraid. She tightly hugged Arthur's arm and rested her head on his shoulder, murmuring, "You might not understand, but I like you as you are now, not who you'll be in the future." Arthur's nervous and shy emotions suddenly froze. He wondered if the woman before him had discovered his true identity. He turned his head, about to explain something, when he saw Mabel's face close to his. Her delicate features and eyes like spring water. I'm not joking. This version of you makes me can't help but like you. And want to marry you and spend the rest of my life with you. You know what? I think I've fallen in love with you. Before Arthur could think about what she meant, he saw Mabel moving closer to him, their faces almost touching. If this continued, they would surely kiss. This absolutely can't happen. However, before he could act to push Mabel away, she had already wrapped her arms around his neck, parted her red lips, and kissed him on the mouth. It was like a thunderbolt in clear sky, exploding in Arthur's ears. He stood there in a daze, staring blankly at Mabel, his mind completely stopped thinking. The joyful and unforgettable moments always seemed to slip away unnoticed. During this time, Mabel had been very happy and relaxed. However, after work on this particular day, she went to Arthur's house as usual, or more accurately, Ewan's house. She had already gotten the key from Arthur some time ago, so she no longer needed to ring the doorbell. She simply opened the front door of the villa with practiced ease. As soon as she entered the hall, she heard the indecent moans of a man and woman coming from upstairs. On the floor, there was a pair of women's high heels, a dress, and men's clothes including underwear. Mabel didn't get angry. Instead, she smiled. It was good, today she could finally let go completely. She went upstairs and pushed open the door. Taking out her phone and looking at the spectacle before her, she said with a laugh, "This is truly spectacular. I'll give Uncle Alvin and Aunt Phoebe a call now, as well as my parents. So they can come and watch your performance too." In the room, the man and woman who were in the midst of their intimate act were startled. The woman hurriedly pulled the bed sheet to cover her exposed body. Why are you here?" Ewan was so frightened by Mabel that he nearly lost his function, quickly trying to find something to cover himself. But when he saw her about to make a call, he immediately begged, "Don't. I was wrong. Please don't call them." However, Mabel turned and went downstairs without a word. Bloody hell! Hurry up and get dressed, then get out. Ewan didn't dare to yell at Mabel, but seeing the woman beside him, he immediately cursed. The woman looked aggrieved but still picked up her clothes from the floor, finally fleeing out the door in a mess. Mr. Granger seems to be in high spirits. Not only are your hobbies hidden in the sofa crevices, but even the cabinets are full of high-end goods. Mabel said with a cold laugh, looking at him with some disdain. Mabel, how did you know? Mabel sneered again, looking at him with contempt. Put your clothes on quickly. With that physique, if it weren't for your money, I really doubt any woman would look at you. Ewan's face turned black with embarrassment as he quickly put on his clothes. This woman had always been like this since childhood, never knowing shame. He couldn't count how many times he had been despised by her. Mabel, when did you come back from abroad? Mabel was lowering her head, packing up some things, all of which she had bought. Without looking back, she said, I think you should know. Why continue this pretense? Why put on an act with me? Ewan couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. He really had no way to deal with this woman, neither verbally nor physically. You know, Mabel, men, we have a lot of work pressure, it's inevitable to relax a bit. But I absolutely guarantee, this was just a fling, nothing more. For the sake of us growing up together, please don't tell my parents, all right? Mabel's expression remained indifferent. She didn't even look at him directly as she packed the books. Sketchbooks, flowers, and photos of her and Arthur together into a large bag. She looked around at everything. This place held memories of her and Arthur, the laughter, the warm moments. And now, she was leaving it all behind forever. Because her love wasn't here. Where is he? She asked. What? Ewan was confused by the question. You know, there's absolutely no chance for us to be together, so you don't need to feel any burden. Tell me where he is. I don't understand what you're talking about. I said, you don't need to worry. I'll explain to my parents, and to Uncle Alvin and Aunt Phoebe. I'll clarify our relationship to both sets of parents, and I'll admit that I fell in love with someone else. It's my problem, not yours. Mabel's face wore a smile, but her tone was cold. Ewan stood there with his mouth agape, not knowing whether to be happy, dejected, or angry. You really fell in love with someone else? Yes, I fell in love with your brother, Arthur. Silence. The hall suddenly fell into a terrifying silence. After a long while, Ewan finally laughed self-mockingly. So, you already knew. Did you think you were clever? Mabel laughed too, looking at this childhood friend who had gradually turned into a spoiled rich kid, someone she no longer recognized. When did you find out? I knew the first time I met Arthur. Even though he looks exactly like you, and even though I was studying abroad for 2 years, I still recognized it at first glance. Ewan increasingly felt that the crazy woman before him was too terrifying. If she really married his brother, he reckoned that idiot brother of his would definitely not have a good life. Actually, I should thank you, Mabel continued. If it weren't for your elaborate scheme to have Arthur impersonate you, I really wouldn't have had the chance to meet an honest, reliable man who can be adorably awkward at times, but also makes me feel secure. At this point, Mabel shrugged indifferently, feeling particularly relaxed today. She decided to pour out all the words she had been holding back in her heart. Although I'm not short of money and I'm also a rich kid, I'm like most girls. If I had to choose between a romantic relationship full of sweet talk and a simple, stable marriage, I would choose to marry the person I like and live an ordinary life. Maybe your brother isn't good with words, doesn't know how to sweet talk like you, and won't deliberately try to please me. But he lives life seriously, works hard to improve himself, and respects others. If I had to choose between you and him, I would give my heart to him without hesitation. Because I know Arthur won't let me down. Finally, as a friend, I'll give you a word of advice, Mabel said. She had already obtained Arthur's address and saw no reason to linger any longer. Rather than wasting your youth and time on women, you'd be better off improving yourself. Never mind, I can see from your expression that I'm meddling again. It doesn't matter. It's up to you whether you listen or not. Goodbye. 3 days later. It was evening again. Mabel, wearing a summer dress, looked at the small greasy spoon across the street and smiled to herself. It seemed their first meeting had also been in the evening. What a coincidence. The cafe was quite busy, with plenty of people eating and drinking. To be honest, this was Mabel's first time in such a small eatery. Although she wasn't a spoiled girl, she was still the daughter of a wealthy family and usually dined in high-end restaurants. Perhaps it was because she was too pretty, or her aura too refined, or maybe her height was too imposing. Whatever the reason, when Mabel entered the cafe, the previously noisy place suddenly fell silent, with many people secretly glancing at her. Mabel had been used to such stares since childhood and wasn't intimidated. She walked confidently towards the kitchen. Arthur was busy cooking, sweating profusely, and hadn't noticed the beautiful sight at the door. Without looking up, he said, "What would you like?" The menu's on the wall, Just let me know when you've decided. I'll have fish and chips. The familiar, melodious voice startled Arthur, who had been fully concentrated on his work. He turned around in disbelief and saw the woman who had been in his thoughts day and night, with whom he had spent over a month together. He thought he must be dreaming again. But remembering their respective statuses, Arthur suppressed his joy and surprise, asking only with confusion. All right, I'll make it right away. What's this? Using formal language with your girlfriend? Don't tell me you don't recognize me. That's the kind of cliché you only see in soap operas. Now that I'm here, you should know why. I told you, it's you I like. How did you find me? Your brother, Ewan Granger, told me. Seeing Arthur's sweat-soaked appearance, Mabel felt a pang in her heart. She quickly put down her handbag and a small package, and without caring about her expensive clothes, she washed her hands and said with a smile, I'll help you. Don't think that just because I'm from a wealthy family, I can't do this. You should know that. Don't refuse, you cook, and I'll take orders, serve dishes, and handle the till. As long as you don't mind me getting in the way. Arthur stared at Mabel in amazement, thinking how unconventional this young lady was. With her going to such lengths, it would be hypocritical to refuse now. They could discuss other matters when they weren't so busy. He nodded and continued cooking. For the first time since Arthur's disappearance, Mabel's face lit up with the happiest and most gentle smile. She picked up a small notepad and went out to attend to the customers. Oi, love. Are you Arthur's girlfriend? A middle-aged man asked, munching on some roast potatoes. Yes, I am his girlfriend, Mabel replied. Hearing the man refer to her as Arthur's girlfriend made her heart flutter with joy. Well. You two make a handsome couple, the man said, giving her a thumbs up and looking her up and down. Usually, she would be 5 feet 11 inches in heels, but today, wearing a summer dress, she had on white canvas shoes, making her about 5 feet 9 inches. Thank you, she said. Young lady, Arthur's a good lad. Make sure you treat him right, an elderly gentleman nearby advised with a smile. Don't worry, I'll do my best to marry him as soon as possible. Mabel replied confidently, chatting with the older patrons while helping Arthur serve dishes. I'm sorry for deceiving you earlier, Arthur said later. You don't need to apologize, Mabel replied. They were sitting together, eating simple home-cooked food. The small cafe was now empty of customers. Hearing this, Arthur was puzzled. He really couldn't understand why she had come to find him today. Darling, I missed you, Mabel said, looking at Arthur beside her. The longing of so many days finally caused her eyes to turn red, and unable to control her emotions any longer, she threw herself into Arthur's arms. Arthur didn't know how to comfort her. His hands hovered in midair, unsure whether to put them down or not, feeling extremely awkward. You're Ewan's. Please stop deceiving yourself, okay? Yes, Ewan and I grew up together, but we're just friends. We don't have that kind of relationship between a man and a woman. As for the engagement, it was just our parents playing matchmaker. I've already told my parents everything a few days ago. The person I love is you, do you understand? It's you, Arthur Langley, not Ewan Granger. Now, are you still going to push me away? Or are you going to disappear again, vanishing without a trace? Let me tell you, I'm sticking with you for life. Mabel's eyes were red with a mix of hurt and determination. As their gazes locked in a timeless moment, she wrapped her arms around Arthur's neck and kissed him on the lips. Darling, your true identity was exposed long ago. And I've hopelessly fallen in love with you. Oh, Arthur mumbled, his head spinning, feeling a hint of happiness and joy. Just oh? Mabel asked. Arthur's face was flushed, but he felt shy. Looking at the beauty in his arms, thinking about how she had set aside a woman's pride and her social status to come here and confess to him, he wondered if he was being too fussy and indecisive. Well, what is it? Actually, there's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time. Mabel's big, mascara-enhanced eyes looked dreamily at Arthur. Their faces so close their noses were almost touching, their warm breaths mingling. Actually. Arthur slowly leaned towards her ear. I like you too. The night was hazy, with crickets chirping. A couple embraced, crying tears of happiness, the sweet taste of love filling the room. The moon slowly peeked out from behind a dark cloud, gazing down at the small cafe on earth. The sign above the door read, "The taste of happiness."